what he is, a statue of our times, an example for men of all ages and all colors. He is now and will always be the champ of my prayers. And it's kind of nice to know that the man who never rested on canvas now sleeps on clouds.
He was a man with dignity, with humility, with the greatest respect for law enforcement. And he tried to live a life that was helpful to other people. He would help somebody else and neglect himself.
What I remember most about Joe Louis is not how many men he knocked out, how great he was, but how he got so popular and so great on earth. But spiritually, he just stayed the same. He always humbled.
He not alone was one of the greatest heavyweight champions we ever had, but he was one of the greatest human beings we ever had.
Well, I was born in Alabama. I was raised up in Detroit. Mother and father were working people. My sisters and brother also worked at the Henry Ford Motor Company in Detroit. And eventually I worked there for about 6 months. Then I went into fighting.
The winner and still champion of the world, Joe Louis.
Joe Louis Barrow, heavyweight champion of the world from 1937 to 1949, longest reign of all time, with a record of 25 successful title defenses. The champion of champions, the greatest of them all. Although colored, almost overnight, Joe Louis would make that quaint expression obsolete. Modest, low-keyed, Joe spoke softly and carried a big stick, or rather, 2 explosive fists. If those fists spoke eloquently for him in the ring, outside the ring, his very presence spoke just as convincingly for tolerance, in a sport where before him there had only been racial ignorance and hate. When Joe Louis was born in 1914 on a rundown sharecropper farm in rural Alabama, another black man was champion. The first, and white America hoped the last, until 24 years later when Joe Louis would be as popular a champion as Jack Johnson was despised. Barred from a title fight at home, Johnson finally caught up with champion Tommy Burns in Australia and punished him until the police stopped the cameras and jumped into the ring to end the slaughter. A black champion in a white world. America, except for its invisible 5 million Negroes, was in shock. There had been great black fighters knocking at the door, Sam Langford, Joe Jeanette, but never allowed to fight for the championship. Its diamond-studded belt had been reserved for whites only. When Jack Johnson returned to America, flaunting that symbol of world supremacy, he walked into a buzzsaw of prejudice. There was an almost religious crusade to find the great white hope, the giant with the proper epidermis who might redeem the honor of the white race. Even the old champ, James J. Jeffries, was urged out of retirement to bring the championship back to white America. But not even with 3 other white ex-champions in his corner, cheering him and cursing Johnson, could the old white knight prevail against the black. Lynch spirit was in the air. Johnson was lucky to get out of the ring alive. There was no civil rights movement in 1910. No one to stand up for Johnson in his fight for fair play. So he fought his lonely battle with primitive weapons, playing to the hilt his role of bad nigger, encouraging the beautiful white women drawn to his panther-like physique and flashing his diamond teeth at his white tormentors. Driven out of the country on a trumped-up sex charge involving a white woman, and after years of exile in Europe as a black ghost, he made a deal to defend his title in Havana against giant Jess Willard. Since Johnson, before the fight, had shown off in resplendent white, Willard chose to enter the ring wearing hangman black. It was a fight Johnson always claimed he'd had to throw in order to come back to America. Good riddance, cried our boxing fraternity, declaring an unofficial but nonetheless operative law. From now on, no more nigger champions. If you want to be heavyweight champion of the world, you better be white. The heavyweight champion of the world is more than merely the most destructive fist fighter on earth. There has always been something mythic about this figure that transcends the sport of fisticuffs. He becomes as much a torchbearer for his day as presidents and prime ministers, reflecting the character and spirit of his country. Larger than life, he personifies our current passions, our prejudices, our hopes and aspirations. Think of raucous John L. Sullivan at the turn of the century, and the besieged Jack Johnson. Jack Dempsey and the vigor and flamboyance of the 1920s, and his successor, Gene Tunney, a Gatsby in boxing trunks who married his heiress, won and kept his cool million, and went on to grace boards of directors in the big business spirit of Coolidge and Hoover. Think of square and sturdy Rocky Marciano in the 50s, and rebellious, iconoclastic Muhammad Ali in the Black Power anti-war 1960s. Every great champion, allegorically, comes to symbolize his particular era, and never one more so than Joe Louis Barrow, raised in a mule plow rut of poverty, illiteracy, and the bone-deep segregation that was destroying Jack Johnson when Joe Louis was just a ragged little kid. Losing Joe's hard-worked daddy to a mental institution, Mrs. Barrow took her big family north, exchanging rural poverty for big city poverty, moving into a black ghetto in Detroit in the depth of the Depression. FDR was doing his best to convince the nation that there was nothing to fear but fear itself. But for Mama Barrow and her brood, there were more tangible fears. The wolf at the door, the pinch in the belly, the need of a job. But young Joe found one at the Ford plant, a sweet $25 a week to supplement Mama's relief check. Somehow, Mama held her family together and even encouraged this muscular teenager to better himself.
I was going to school in Detroit, and first my mother wanted me to be a violin player, and which I didn't care that much for it. And so instead of me going to take my violin lesson one day, a friend of mine, whose name was Golden Glove champion of 32 Golden Gloves, he talked me into going to the gym with him to see him train. Thacey McKinney was his name. So I went down to see him train, and I liked it. So next day, I went with him again to the gym, and I joined the gym. And then I put my violin case into the locker. That went on for a couple of weeks, going out to the gym every day and putting my thing in the locker and everything. So when I got home from gym one night, I saw my music teacher was talking with my mother. So I said, well, he must know what I meant. He must have told my mother I've been missing the class so many times. So I told her, she said, well, why you miss so many classes? I told her, I want to be a fighter. So she said, okay, you want to be a fighter, then I'm with you. I started boxing the Golden Glove in 33. I won the 33 Golden Gloves, and then I came back and won the 34 Golden Gloves in Detroit. Then our team went to Chicago to fight Chicago team Golden Glove champion. I won that one, and then I turned pro.
John Roxborough was a logical sponsor, a Detroit numbers man known for his kindness to young black kids who wanted to get ahead. He passed Joe on to someone who could do even more for him, Julian Black, who had the connections in Chicago. They could bankroll Joe Louis, but they couldn't make him a fighter. Jack Blackburn could, a trainer who had the respect of Ray ARCEL, who was to handle Joe's opponents in 15 fights.
Jack Blackburn and I became close friends before he started to train Joe Louis. And I remember going to Chicago in 1934 with Charlie Macera. And Jack Blackburn said to me, I always told you I was going to get him, and I got him now.